The 1,500 smartest kids in America, tracked for 70 years, and the story starts in a jail cell. Los Angeles, 1923. A 14-year-old boy sits in juvenile custody. He ran away from home. From a father who tore up his school books and beat him with a 2x4, to the authorities, he's nobody. One more runaway in a city full of them. Then a letter arrives, not from a relative or a lawyer. Not from anyone who had a reason to care. It's from the most famous psychologist in America.
The correlation was statistically modest.
A man who has never once laid eyes on this kid, and he writes that the boy deserves a second chance because he is gifted. A word this stranger invented. Imagine having enough main character energy to coin the word for genius, then appoint yourself the guy who hands it out. Because this stranger had been collecting children, 1,528 of them, the smartest kids in the country, tested, certified, issued a little gold sticker that says grade A human being. And somewhere in your skull, a small, needy voice just asked, would I have made the cut? I heard that. Hang on to that voice. It's gonna have a very bad night later on. The stranger bet his entire career on one prediction. These children would grow up to run the world. He was wrong, just not in the boring way, where the child geniuses all flame out and break everyone's heart. What actually happened is stranger than that, and a good deal funnier. And the two boys his test rejected, remember them. They come back to embarrass everyone in this story. The collector. The stranger's name was Louis Terman, a Stanford psychologist, and at the time, the closest thing intelligence testing had to a rock star.
I've got the data! You're all in sample A!
He took a French diagnostic exam, gave it an American makeover, and released the Stanford-Binet. The test that shoved 2 letters permanently into the vocabulary, IQ. Terman believed 3 things with total conviction. 1, intelligence could be measured with a number. 2, the number was inherited, like eye color or your uncle's baffling devotion to jazz flute. 3, the number was destiny. He was also, like an uncomfortable percentage of respectable scientists in the 1920s, a eugenicist. A man who thought society should be sorted and ranked by that number. In the 1920s, that was practically a hobby for people with too many degrees and not enough conscience. Set that on a shelf. It comes back like a boomerang made of asbestos. In 1921, he launched the HUD. Teachers across California nominated their brightest. The nominees took group tests. The survivors faced the Stanford-Binet itself. His team screened 168,000 children. To make the cut, you needed an IQ of 140. The ones who got in averaged 151. When the dust settled, 1,528 kids made it, 856 boys, 672 girls. The greatest concentration of certified genius ever assembled in one study. History gave this dream team a nickname, the Termites. 1,500 of the finest minds of a generation, named after the thing you call a guy in a jumpsuit to poison. Terman measured everything. Books in the home, play habits, personality, eventually their marital happiness. Quick, rate our intimacy from 1 to 5. Science needs this by Friday. And then he did the one thing a scientist must never do. He fell in love with his data. He wrote his kids' recommendation letters, pulled strings to get them into Stanford, mentored them, counseled them, protected them like a mother bear with a PhD and a clipboard. He wasn't observing the experiment anymore, he was watering it. Remember that when the harvest comes in. The prophecy. Everyone in 1921 knew what was coming for these kids, because the folk wisdom of the era was brutal. Early ripe, early rot. People genuinely believed child prodigies burned out. Grew into sickly, friendless, unstable adults. The boy genius was a tragedy on a timer. Terman's data took that myth out back and beat it with a 2x4. His gifted kids were taller than average, healthier, more social, better adjusted. Their one statistical defect was slightly worse eyesight. 1,500 future geniuses squinting at a blackboard. And credit where it's due, just this once, Terman nailed this part. Being smart does not doom you to being broken. Every gifted kid who ever got picked last in gym owes this man a small thank you card. And as they grew up, the prophecy seemed to print itself, like a slot machine that only pays out. Follow-ups rolled in, 1928, 1936, 1940, and every time the answers came back glowing. Well over half finished college at a time when 8% of Americans did. Doctorates, patents, novels, more than 50 university professors, future scientists, judges, a Life magazine war correspondent, and the physicist who would go on to run Los Alamos. By mid-century, Terman looked bulletproof. He had found America's future elite in grade school with a pencil and a very confident test. Whatever that number predicted, life seemed to line up and obey it. Destiny apparently fit into 3 digits. At least that's the story if you stop the movie in 1950. Don't stop the movie. The second half is where the projector catches fire.
Naturally, I was tested as a child. The examiner wept, resigned, and took up beekeeping. The certificate hangs above my bathtub. Do carry on with your averages.
The Audit. Now let the decades pass. The termites grow up, take jobs, get married, and every few years, Stanford audits them in what became the longest-running study in the history of psychology. Imagine still getting letters from your childhood IQ test at 65 asking how the marriage is going. The ledger fills in, and the math gets awkward. Number of termites who won a Nobel Prize, 0. Number who won a Pulitzer, 0. Out of 1,528 geniuses tracked for over half a century, not one reached the summit of any field. The scholar who has spent the longest with these files, Dean Simonton, concedes it flatly. All that raw wattage simply never converted into greatness. Most of their lives were fine. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, professors, but the roster also included policemen, seamen, typists, filing clerks. That's Terman's own list. And at least one pool cleaner. Imagine the job interview. Sir, your IQ is in the top 1%. Why are you skimming leaves? The PH demands a poetic touch, Brenda. Also, the dental plan is fantastic. The study's most famous creative achievement? The head writer of I Love Lucy. But when you promised the world 1,500 Einsteins, we came up with the Chocolate Factory episode is a bit of a letdown. Oh, and the runaway from the beginning of this video? Edward Dmytryk. He grew up to direct Hollywood films. The letter worked, 1 for 1. Terman, to his credit, wrote the concession himself inside the study's own pages. Intellect and achievement, he admitted, are far from perfectly correlated. 30 years of data and destiny had quietly filed for divorce from the number and taken the house. The label cut both ways too. One termite put it in one line. Am I up to this? Then I would think Dr. Terman thought I was. An existential crisis wrapped in a humble brag. A quarter of the men and a third of the women said the study changed their lives. One more thing the audit exposed, and this one isn't funny. The sample was overwhelmingly middle class, children already holding most of the cards. Some critics say you could have predicted their outcomes from their zip codes alone. And that still isn't the strangest thing in the file. The rejects. The strangest entry in the ledger isn't about anyone inside the study. It's about 2 boys who didn't get in. In the 1920s, Terman's team tested 2 kids in California who didn't score high enough. The team looked at their scores, decided they were nothing special, and sent them home. Their names were Luis Alvarez and William Shockley. Luis Alvarez won the Nobel Prize in Physics. William Shockley also won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Sit with that. The instrument built to catch every genius in California rounded up 1,528 children, who would win a combined total of 0 Nobel Prizes, and personally rejected the only 2 Nobel laureates it ever came within 100 feet of. A margin of error doesn't do that. That's a smoke detector that goes off for burnt toast, then sleeps through the actual house fire. Now, honesty, because the statisticians have a point, and they're very upset right now. A Nobel is so rare that no test on Earth could reliably predict one. People have run the simulations. The odds were always against it. Fine, granted, but notice what that defense admits. Whatever turns a kid into someone who changes physics forever, the test could not see it, did not register so much as a blip. You can file that under minor limitation if you're feeling generous. Everyone who actually ran the numbers came to see it as the entire conclusion. And one of those 2 boys learned exactly the wrong lesson from it.
The Nobel. How quaint. I hold the Bodleian ribbon for competitive Latin. Declined twice, naturally, before accepting. One must let the committees suffer a little.
The fall. Follow Shockley. His story is where this video stops being cute and starts being a warning label. The reject didn't just do well. At Bell Labs, he co-invented the transistor, the tiny switch inside every phone, every computer, every satellite, arguably the most consequential invention of the 20th century, Nobel Prize, 1956. Then he moved home to Palo Alto and founded Shockley Semiconductor, where his engineers got so fed up with him that they quit and started their own companies, which is how Silicon Valley got started. An entire regional economy powered largely by how badly people wanted to get away from one man. One man, rejected by the Genius Study. He outachieved all 1,528 of its members combined. This is the part where the music swells. And the underdog finally gets his happy ending. Shockley didn't get one. Worse, he didn't seem to want one. The man who once flunked an IQ cutoff would spend the rest of his life as the most fanatical believer in IQ the world has ever produced. In his final decades, he abandoned physics for a crusade. He argued that intelligence was pure genetic destiny, and that people with low IQs were degrading humanity. He proposed paying people with IQs under 100 to be voluntarily sterilized. A man who once failed an IQ cutoff, deciding IQ determines who gets to exist. He donated to the so-called Nobel Prize sperm bank, a very sad freezer in California, and was the only donor willing to admit it publicly. Students at Stanford burned him in effigy, and at home, the logic followed him all the way down. He dismissed his own children as a genetic disappointment, publicly blaming his first wife's inferior genes. He died in 1989, estranged from his colleagues, his friends, and the children he had long since written off. They learned their father was dead by reading about it in the newspaper. No one bothered to call. His own kids found out the way strangers did. William Shockley was living proof that the test misses what matters most. The evidence was his own biography. He carried it for 79 years and never once opened the book. The ledger. So, what separated the termites who soared from the ones who sank? The study answered that too. It just took until 1968 to say it out loud. Terman's associate, Melita Odin, pulled the files of the 100 most successful termites. Group A, the professors, the scientists, the judges, and the 100 least successful. Group C, the technicians, the clerks, and yes, the pool cleaner. He's back, basically a recurring character at this point. Then she compared their childhood IQ scores. They were the same, statistically identical. The sacred number this entire half-century study was built around could not tell Group A from Group C. As a predictor, the number was a fortune cookie that says, "You will encounter water." And the small, needy voice from the cold open, the one that asked if you'd have made the cut, this is its bad night. The cut was real. It just never cut anything that mattered. What could tell them apart? Persistence, self-confidence, the habit of setting goals and organizing a life around them. Early encouragement from parents, fortitude, not aptitude, character, the kind you can't stamp on a forehead at age 10. Now, before you swing to the opposite myth and start a cult of IQ is meaningless, no, IQ works like height in basketball. Being tall gets you through the door. But once everyone in the room is tall, height stops deciding who wins. Every termite was through the door. Every one of them was tall. And from there, the sacred, inherited, destiny-shaped number went quiet. Nothing left to say. The study built to prove the number was destiny ended up proving the number was a ticket.
Persistence. I once pursued a single semicolon through 4 editions of Thucydides. 40 years. The semicolon blinked first. That, children, is character.
It gets you into the building. It never tells you what happens inside. Louis Terman spent 35 years watching 1,500 brilliant children dismantle his life's thesis. And give him this, he wrote the concession himself, published it under his own name. Most people would rather set the data on fire. This man built a castle on one idea, and then personally walked to the gate and let the invading army in. The kids who thrived weren't the ones with the highest scores. They were the ones who lived as if the score wasn't the story, which matters to you, because you've been measured your entire life. Grades, test scores, credit scores, rankings, follower counts, little numbers assigned early, whispering that they already know how your story ends. Oh, you gotta be in algebra? Guess you'll never invent the transistor? But in the longest experiment psychology has ever run, the measurement turned out to be the least interesting fact about every single one of those children. So the next time a number tries to tell you who you are, some score, some algorithm that claims to know your ceiling, remember the 1,528 people it was surest about, they peaked at a sitcom. The 2 rejects built the modern world. And the guy who cleaned their pools, same number as the judges. That small voice from the beginning, the one that just had its bad night, go easy on it. It spent this whole story asking the wrong question. Whether you'd have made Terman's list was never what mattered. What mattered was what you'd go on to do that no test in that room could ever see coming. That's the thing that decided every life in this study. And it's the thing that decides yours. And that's how spaghetti untangles destiny. See you in the next episode.